Welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration, and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast. I am a lecturer in early childhood studies at Aston University, an associate lecturer at the Open University, a trustee for the Fatherhood Institute, and an independent writer, speaker, and consultant for critical early years. Now, throughout this series, we'll be exploring representation in the early years, inspiring you with guidance on ways to be more inclusive in your practice through covering topics such as cultural and gender diversity. And on that note, I'm delighted to introduce Gina Rippon as today's guest. Throughout today's episode, we'll look at what settings can do to promote a more gender-inclusive practice. So, Gina, there'll be lots of listeners joining who work in early year settings with children on a daily basis. What are those practical steps and strategies that they can take to challenge those gender stereotypes that children might be learning in the early years?
The environment is really important. I think, children spend a lot of time wandering from one classroom to another or one activity to another. And most of the schools I've been into now very much have sort of exhortatory messages and pictures and things on the walls. And I think just being aware of making sure that those messages are gender inclusive. I think that's really important. For example, if in your classroom you're talking about science, just to get on another soapbox, make sure that there's equal numbers of male and female scientists or disabled scientists, even just to make sure it's really inclusive. Which can be hard, because if you can talk about Nobel Prize winners, then, you've got a pretty small pool to draw on at the moment for female scientists. But you can actually make that part of the story. Isn't it that there's only been 2 or 3 female Nobel Prize winners for chemistry or something like that? But so that could be part of the story. I think there was a very good project run in London called Lifting Limits, which was actually looking at going into primary schools, and they tried out various programs to encourage gender inclusivity in the early years. And one of the key things they had, which is a lovely idea, but I can imagine teachers thinking, oh, we've got so much more to do. They had a gender equality champion. So there was one teacher they had training for them, but their role was just to keep an eye on everything within the school where there might be a biased gender message. So it could be assemblies or pictures on the walls or activities which separated boys and girls. And so somebody whose role was very particularly to just keep an eye on what was going on. And that worked really well. But also making sure that teachers who were in charge of what they were teaching the children, because, with external inspection regimes, you all have to have a fairly consistent curriculum. But within that, teachers get a bit of a choice about, what they're going to teach, how they're going to teach it, how they're going to encourage the children differently to engage. So having a kind of gender ear, if you like, in all of that is important. And again, particularly within the early years, it's quite hard because I think it's something like 85% of the primary school teachers are female. Being aware of the consequences of that, because again, you've got these little gender detectives thinking, oh, all my teachers are female, so only teachers are female, things like that. So sometimes saying to children, you might think this, but gosh, isn't it amazing? And there were some nice stories where they got children to draw pictures of astronauts and engineers, and then they brought in, an astronaut and an engineer who were females, and a nanny and a ballet dancer who were males, kind of thing. So actually challenging the children themselves, because they are open to it. In a way that can be the trouble, because they're so keen to learn that you'd say you might think that all astronauts are male or all teachers are female, etc. But hey, here is a female astronaut or something. So any opportunity to say you're getting this picture of your world, but it actually might be slightly different.
Yeah, I really like what you were saying there, Gina, about the importance of gender equality champions. I think that can be really important in settings to have someone to take responsibility for this sort of work. But in my own experience, I often reflect on practitioners who are not willing to engage in these sorts of issues. They might have thought and looked at gender and realised that someone was doing kind of issues around gender, and taking this on as a project, and thought to themselves, that's not for me. I don't want to get involved in that. So how important is it that we get the whole staff team engaged in proactively challenging those gender stereotypes?
Well, crucial in a way. I think you need to get, I think the marketing term is buy-in, because again, children are very adept at picking up if somebody's only doing something because they've been told to do it. You want somebody to really engage with it. And actually you could say, so why isn't it for you? I mean, that's another thing you could say to somebody. And if they're genuinely uncomfortable, then obviously you have to respect that decision. And I guess the head teacher, whoever allocates things, would have to bear that in mind. But I think you can, once you start saying, where this might take these children. So if you're only dealing with 6-year-olds, you probably aren't thinking, so what's this person going to be like when they're 20, 30, whatever. But if you can say what you do now is actually probably one of the most crucial periods of their lives, it's really important that we get it right. I mean, you would hope that would give you the buy-in that you want. The other thing you can do actually is engage the children too. You can get the gender equality champions within the classroom. And that was one of the things with the documentary that we talked about earlier, was that when the teacher was calling if he accidentally called a boy mate or a girl sweet pea, children could actually take him to task and give him a naughty point on the chart or something. So engaging the children with it is a good way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And children are, of course, naturally inquisitive in their play and in the language that they use. And they will ask questions about gender and differences they see. And sometimes practitioners might find them to be uncomfortable or not be sure how to respond. But actually, they can be quite critical moments, can't they, for practitioners to really open up those questions around gender and difference with young children.
Absolutely. And I think there are very good sort of training opportunities. I mean, even in the sort of more formal health and social care type curriculum, because you can't expect somebody to try and unpack literally generations of stereotypes on their own without training. So I think that's a key aspect of it. And certainly I think they are now starting to introduce it more into teacher training curriculum. So it's not just a question of delivering a subject, which is possibly less the case in primary schools. But of course, that's where the message is first heard and where it very often gets reinforced.
Yeah, absolutely. And listeners may be working in practice with children who are already questioning their gender and displaying, certain performances of identity that don't conform with what we see in wider society. So how can practitioners be better equipped and supported to work with those children in practice?
Yeah, and I think it's something that there should be a consistent message. People who are working at the forefront of that area need to be much more aware of their own biases, I think. I think being relaxed about it sounds odd, is saying, oh, we should really do this, really powerful messages, but be relaxed about it as well. I think that's quite hard, because then again, you get children were picking up, this is really important because look how much time they're spending on it, as opposed to, yeah, that's fine if you want to come to school wearing a dress or those kind of things. Sorting out priorities. But I think allowing children to express themselves is really important, because in particular, I mean, one of the areas I work in is looking at late diagnosed autistic females, and they will talk about their early years experience, about the fact that they realized they were different very early on, but they were also being given a message: you're a little girl, you should be quiet, you shouldn't make a fuss, you should be friendly with everybody. And so, you know, we need to be aware of these children who appear very confident, but actually don't have the wherewithal to understand what's happening. You just fine tune your own radar to say, is this little girl really part of this group, or is she just hanging around on the edge and they're really ignoring her? And similarly with little boys. So I think, you know, if you didn't have as much else to do, your own personal radar, noticing what's going on and intervening. Because, I mean, not intervening in an aggressive sort of way, but just being aware that different children will be having different experiences. They're not all the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that comment on fine-tuning your own radar feels really important for practitioners to take away. One final area that we haven't touched upon is the role of policy and guidance, and how useful that can be for practitioners in supporting them to be proactive in their practice and supporting them to be able to respond comfortably and confidently in situations where issues about gender might arise. How important for you is it that settings have a clear set of policy and guidance around gender stereotypes and how they might respond to them if issues occur in practice?
I think consistency is really important, because again, these messages are being picked up by our gender detectives. So I think training is important. I think also Iceland, for example, as well as being the least gender biased country in the world, allegedly, they have sort of gender equality charters within the schools. Government policy, every school has to have some form of gender equality charter. What evidence is there of gender biases in our classroom practices, etc., our teachers, whatever, how are we going to deal with them? And they get assessed, in the same way as use the term Ofsted. You have external agencies will say, are you aware of what's going on or what's not going on, and what are you going to do about it if it seems that there is some kind of bias? So a kind of external validation of what you're doing, I think would be, and that would certainly help the practitioners, because they may feel very strongly about what they're doing, but if there's somebody outside saying, oh, we haven't got time for that, or it's more important that they, whatever. And again, I think that would also ensure consistency. So, if every school has to have some kind of charter to which people sign up and that they are assessed on it, I think that's important. I think there's some really interesting moves about banning gender toy marketing. I mean, it's now the law in France, for example, that you're not allowed to introduce gender into any kind of toy marketing. And Lego also has got a big campaign on to stop the gendered marketing of Lego. It might have some way to go, but but at least people are having the conversation and thinking about it. So those kind of policies are really important to encourage.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that kind of strong government stance on gender inequality feels really, really important. So we've covered quite a lot within this episode, Gina. We've looked at the role of the environment, the messages that we have towards children, the importance of reflection again, the value of policy and guidance, Perhaps listeners might want to go away and reflect on gender equality champions within their setting, but also think about how they can get the whole staff team involved. I guess my main takeaway from this episode is we're not changing the child necessarily, but changing our response to the child and better honouring their needs and their natural curiosity. So that's a great place to end it there. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Shaddai.
I would like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Gina Rippon, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Shaddai Tembo, and Gina Rippon. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and accessing exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.